I'm Rusty Dornin from the Kaufman Fellows Academy, and welcome back to another Hangout for Venture Deals with our Honorable Miriam Rivera. She, of course, has been an investor for years. She was a former Deputy General Counsel for Google and really has done thousands of hours of negotiations. So let's jump right into this. And first question is really, what is absolutely the best way an entrepreneur can prepare for a negotiation with an investor?
Well, I find it surprising how few people actually prepare. One, there's a lot of really great startup sites on the internet. Startuplawyer.com is one of them, for example, where you could go and actually understand what's likely to be in a term sheet that you're going to get from an investor, and to understand both why the investor wants certain things in there and why you might want to negotiate certain things in particular ways. The good thing about a lot of the standard promissory notes and stock purchase agreements is that they are relatively well defined and have been around for a long time, so there is good publicly available information about what the substance of your negotiation will include. It doesn't give you market information, but that's something else that is important to try to prepare.
What's the best way to try to figure out somebody's negotiating style?
Well, oftentimes the best that you can do is try to find someone who's in that person's portfolio, for example, and talk with them founder to founder if you're a founder in a company. Certainly that is something that I've tried to do when I'm facing particular companies, for example. I look up the bios of the people on the team. I understand where they went to law school. I understand what kinds of jobs they've held in the past. And if it's possible, I do try to, use Google. Sorry, I shouldn't use Google as a verb, being a former counsel for the company. But I try to use Google to research people, their LinkedIn, etc., and just be as prepared as I can be for understanding where they're coming from, what things I might have in common with them, and if possible, and I find that I know someone, actually even asking questions about that. And I definitely recommend diligencing people that you think you want to have as investors, because you're going to be working with these people potentially for a decade. So it is not too much to ask that you actually spend some time to get to know what these people are like and how they are to work with after you've had them make an investment in your company.
Obviously you've been talking to them a lot about making the investment before you even get to the term sheet stage. Are there things you could really, is it helpful to try to work things out before you put anything on paper? Just at least general parameters?
Well, usually when you're in the process of just getting to know each other, you will talk about certain parts of the relationship that will ultimately go into your term sheet and your documents, your legal documents. And often those will include things like, so are you planning on being with the company full-time and long-term, understanding that you've been here a certain number of years potentially already before an investment is made, what you understand the importance of trying to continue to have you here for the long term after the investment is made. I think sometimes founders believe, well, I've been working on this company for 2 years and I should have vesting on a time elapsed basis, as opposed to actually the money's just coming in now and they want that money to be associated with a going forward period, not a look back. And so those are the kinds of things that often come up before you even get to the point of doing a term sheet. Depending on how experienced you are, things like control and board seats and other things may also come up. Sometimes founders who have been there and done that and been successful in the past are able to negotiate, for example, more board seats on their side of the table than on the investor side of the table. Sometimes there's going to be provisions that would give more votes to a founder than the investor will get. So instead of a 1-for-1 vote, it may be a 2-for-1 vote or some other ratio. So those kind of things often come up, but more often with more experienced entrepreneurs who, or sometimes more naive entrepreneurs, one or the other usually.
Okay, we have a question. We were offered to be acquired during our fundraising process. Should we use this as leverage with investors if we do not want to be acquired?
So somebody made them an offer to buy their company, and they are trying to use it as leverage. I'm trying to understand if it's leverage against the investor that is offering to buy the company or against other investors.
I think he said he doesn't want to be acquired, but if he's trying to negotiate a deal with current investors and then somebody else comes in, I think that's the question. Can he use that as saying, "Hey, look, we're so good that people are looking at us"?
That certainly, depending on the no-shop agreement that they've signed, they may be able to talk about that potential acquisition. Also, the fact that somebody wants to acquire you is in itself something that may be able to be used to get an investment from that party. If for some reason they really, they cannot come to a meeting of the minds with respect to an acquisition at that point in time, they may decide that it is worth investing in and potentially trying to get a pretty large share of the company. So that's something to work on both sides, in the sense that you can work it with the person who's expressed interest in an acquisition, and you can also work it with other prospective investors, because presumably if it's a pretty serious potential offer of acquisition, there should be some sort of valuation for the company, and that's often the most material term that an investor and the founder are trying to negotiate, is at what price am I going to be valued?
Right. And he had a follow-up question, but I think you pretty much answered it. Should we mention that we've been offered to be acquired?
You typically have a no-shop clause if you were really in a serious negotiation for an acquisition. Then they'll typically have given you some advance warning that they're likely to make an offer, but you haven't yet signed that no-shop. And in which case, yes, it's really helpful, and you should try to get as many of the cats herded around the table as quickly as possible, because once you sign an actual no-shop provision, you are prohibited from actually talking about that acquisition. So sometimes you can negotiate in that no-shop provision if you were in far enough discussions with other parties. You can have them excluded from the confidentiality provisions. So that's something to try to negotiate.
Right. And we have a question from Santosh Rajan, who's already proven he is the gentleman that did ask to speak to the general partner and held out for that. So his question is, can the founder set the terms for negotiation? I am following the Venture Deals book course, and anything outside that is non-negotiable.
I think that would make you sound somewhat naive, actually, and the thing to try to stand firm on are the principles that you may have learned in the book, but do not mention the book, because that will make you sound like a complete rookie. And so and I also think it's important to be careful with different investors are going to want different kinds of relationships. There are some people that really do respond well to the approach that Brad uses of, holding out for the general partner. There's other people that would think, this guy's an arrogant jerk and I want nothing to do with him. So you have to be able to read the people that you're trying to connect with in order to understand how they might perceive a certain action. Some people just love, brash, aggressive entrepreneurs, and if that's a style you want to cultivate, then go try to find those kinds of investors, but realize that in the process you may also lose appeal for other investors who, frankly, they don't like that style.
And you talk a lot about being able to see the other side's perspective in a negotiation. Talk about that. Why is that so critical?
Well, one is, from a purely Machiavellian notion of, or the art of war, you have to be able to anticipate the maneuvers and the motivations and the desires of the other side in order to both prepare for a negotiation and to be able to use that kind of information in the process of the negotiation to get the other side to feel that they're getting the things that they really want and value in order to keep moving the negotiations forward. One of the things that's important to understand empirically is that oftentimes there's a process of negotiation where people have to feel that they are having accommodations made by the other side. And this is actually a real emotional issue, and it actually doesn't make any logical sense. But a person who starts off with a more reasonable contract is often seen as unreasonable because they give up fewer things in negotiating that deal than a person who starts off with a completely one-sided contract and then works their way to the same exact contract that you might have started with if you were a reasonable person. So it's important for people to understand that there are human dynamics apart from logic that often affect the relationship, and you need to use both knowledge of empirical negotiation research and also awareness of the emotional side of people in the best form of preparation, because it is not just about logic and it's not just about numbers. The more that you are attuned intuitively to the other side and how they're responding to different things, the more effective you will be as a negotiator.
So should you actually plan maybe to ask for more unreasonable things, knowing that you're going to move, to show them that you're able to move, or is that dangerous to do?
Done deal. Often, always do some level of that. It's something that, one, just by virtue of most legal agreements that your counsel are going to write for you are going to be one-sided in your own favor. And there's a couple of different reasons for that, and I think it's important for people to understand how legal philosophy also impacts negotiations. So one, in our American system of law, we have what's called an adversarial process. We believe that the truth will out through an adversarial process between either the state and the defense for a defendant, or in the process of a negotiation between two people that start off at complete opposite extremes and are going to fight their way to a deal that by the time you get there, probably both of you are almost at your walking away point because you've gotten to the point of indifference, it's sometimes called in negotiation theory. And the reality is that because you know empirically that certain things are true, one, that you do have to have some of this giving up in order for the other side to feel that they're making progress, and two, it's often, there's other empirical evidence that demonstrates that if you start off with higher asks, you get closer to what you'd actually like to have. And so those two things are kind of corollaries, one of the other. And you do take all that into consideration in trying to set up your positions. And yes, I often would develop a whole plan for a negotiation that would say, here's what I'm actually, willing to do, willing to give up, and here's what I would exchange for that in this negotiation, and use things that I knew I'd be willing to give up ultimately to get some important point. So that's the problem sometimes of trying to be reasonable ex ante, is that you now don't have enough bargaining chips.
Right. Okay. We have a question from a viewer, Diane Cairns. The bottom line for investors seems to be a pre-existing paying customer base with signed contracts. Is it unrealistic to seek venture capital without this, or is it still possible to secure funds to build out a promising business model before a customer base?
Well, one, I have to say that there's a big difference in this country between the East Coast and the West Coast on this front. So often, East Coast investors are definitely looking for that revenue-generating contracts and that they have customers that are paying customers. I find that that's less true in the Silicon Valley area, and of course, it still has to be a good story that you're going to be able to find people to pay. But there are plenty of people making very large investments in companies that don't have a dollar of revenue even at Series B. And so, one, don't psych yourself out thinking that that is the only way to get investment, because it's empirically false. There are plenty of companies getting investments that have no revenue, no customers yet. So the question is, who do you need to approach to be able to find someone who believes in you, your team, your product, and the market that you're trying to sell into enough to make an investment without demonstrable revenue? That's your question, and it's up to you to do the legwork to find the investors that are making those kinds of investments, and to realize that you may not be even in the right geography. There are plenty of people who move to the Bay Area from New York City because they cannot find those kind of investors in New York City, and they can here.
How important is it for the founding team to show a united front in the negotiations? Have you ever been involved where internal debate with maybe a founding team ended up hurting the negotiations?
Well, there are a lot of things that can hurt. The team is one of the critical factors in making an investment. So when you're looking at, some of the key factors would be the technology, the market, the team, and also timing. Is it a good time either in the environment to make this kind of a deal? Is it a good time within this industry to invest in this technology next? So those are kinds of timing questions. But the team is such an important factor. Empirically, Noam Wasserman out of Harvard Business School says that about 60% of all startups fail because of founder relationship issues. Absolutely have nothing to do with the technology or the market or the timing. So, it's a big thing that people are going to consider. Now, I actually think it's important to see if your team having differences of opinion about important things in the company, because you'd like to be able to observe as an investor the dynamics around conflict and be able to assess for yourself how well people can get through conflicts. How do they resolve them? Do they use logic, emotion? Do they, browbeat one another? Is there respect in the team for differences of opinion? That sort of thing is going to all be some of what investors are looking for as they meet with the team. They're also looking at the quality of the team, obviously, their experiences, the companies they've worked for in the past, the work they've done, and their education, how well they present. Do they seem like they would be able to lead teams within the company and motivate them, et cetera? So there's a lot of team information that a good investor is looking for. But conflict in and of itself is not a problem. It's more how people deal with conflict.
Okay, we have another question. What are your weak spots during a negotiation? What can entrepreneurs do to be in the driver's seat during negotiations outside of having a killer product/team? Well,
that's a big part of it. But outside of having a good product or team, some of the things that you can do are to work the problem hard. You should expect to do a lot of meetings in order to try to develop both a good pitch and to be able to have more than one potential investor in your company. Oops, sorry. For some reason, my computer has decided to freak out,
No,
and
you look fine. You're fine. We can see you fine.
I can't see you though. Okay,
Oh,
there.
there.
Okay. Um, so the sorry, refresh my memory.
What he's asking, how can entrepreneurs be in the driver's seat? But he's also asking, what are your weak spots during a negotiation?
Okay, so weak spots are definitely, ignorance. So eliminate ignorance, right? That's one of the things that you can do. And then the other thing is to have multiple conversations going on close enough in time that you can get to more than one prospective investor when the time comes to kind of corral the process and close. And I think that what a lot of people don't realize is that this is a lot like selling anything else. You have to have a pretty huge pipeline to get a funnel that actually results in like 2 potential investors. So if you're not doing, tens of investor meetings, you're probably not doing enough. I would expect that an average startup company is going to have somewhere between 30 and 50 meetings to get angel investors, for example, to get a handful of angel investors. And for a VC round, depending on how large the round is, I'd certainly think you'd need to be doing conversations with as many as you can, but it would be clearly probably between 10 and 20 people that you want in the pipeline in order to get to 1 to 2 term sheets, because you always want to have 2, because really the driver's seat is that the person has more people interested in investing than can invest, that they're wanting to take potentially a smaller percentage of the company to still do the deal, right? Because each venture firm in particular is going to want a certain percentage ownership in the company, and you're not going to be able to eliminate that from their consideration set. But if the valuation is high enough because you get multiple investors, then they may be able to take on the smaller percentage ownership of their range.
When you're a first-time founder and perhaps you're dealing with VCs who've been investing for 10, 20 years, that sort of thing, how important is it to not get intimidated?
Well, it's pretty important, right? Because one of the things, and this is hard because 1, VCs can be intimidating, and 2, they can actually be jerks and arrogant jerks at that. One thing I have to say that I typically like entrepreneurs much better than I like my fellow investors. And if I were going to go to a party, I'd rather be with a bunch of entrepreneurs than investors. So the reality is that you're going to run across some pretty hard-nosed customers, some pretty hard-nosed negotiators on deals that are material to your company, and you got to learn to suck it up. It's not about how you feel, and it's not about how jerky somebody is. It's about how well and effectively can you manage under those kinds of conditions, because those conditions are going to exist outside of your fundraising. They're going to exist in your business.
I know this is going to be hard to answer this because you're an attorney, but are there times when the lawyers get in the way of the negotiations? And what can you do about that?
I'm an attorney, but I have to say that one of the things that I use my own, created my own phrase at Google, which was I wanted to find ways to do things with as little legal intervention as possible. And the reason for that is, just more cooks in the kitchen, having also an orientation, which we're trained in law school, to be adversarial, and we have a standard of professionalism which requires us to do zealous advocacy. Zealous advocacy, some people take to the utter extreme and think it means even things like lying to get your customer a better deal. I personally don't believe that, because I think ultimately you're there to serve your client's long-term interests, and it's very unusual for lying to serve the long-term interests of anyone. But that orientation and that philosophy can often get in the way. Plus, there is a lot of complexity that comes up in real business relationships, and oftentimes you need divergent or creative thinking to be able to overcome the complexity and kind of cut to the heart of the matter. And oftentimes lawyers are great analysts and issue spotters, and but they may not be the best problem solver, creative thinkers. And you know, when you have a really great attorney, you tend to have a combination of both of those skills. But I would say that unfortunately, creativity and divergent thinking are less valued in law schools than I think they should be.
As an investor, when would you personally walk away from a negotiation with an entrepreneur?
There's a few things that are real triggers for me. So dishonesty in the process of negotiations, that's pretty much you're a goner in my system of investing. If you're the kind of person who speaks loosely about things that are really precise. So if I ask you how many customers do you have, and you're inflating those numbers, you actually don't have any contracts with anyone, and I later find that out, and I'm going to, right, because I'm going to go do my diligence. I'm going to ask you for all your commercial contracts that you've been bragging about, and I'm going to read them. And if they aren't there when I ask you for them, you pretty much, you know, lost my trust and my confidence at that point, and I'm not going to make an investment. The other things, it's hard because there's a factor that I don't like. I don't particularly like the brash, arrogant type. I have definitely done business with them, and I definitely have been financially successful in some of those relationships. But I would say that oftentimes there is a negative correlation with that personality type because they don't end up working well with their team. They don't end up working well with their customers. They're not humble enough to actually take feedback from their board. And so for me, you have to be really damn brilliant for me to overlook how arrogant you are. And there are times when I have found people that brilliant that I'm willing to set aside my personal distaste for that style. But if I have gone against my better judgment on it, I think it's ended up being the fact that a lot of other people also didn't like doing business with that person, and they weren't successful.
We have another question, probably one of the last here. Can you tell who the other VCs you are talking to, if asked?
You know, I do believe that that's pretty typical, frankly, unless for some reason you've been told not to discuss it. I think it's actually fair game. Now, you should realize that what that is they're trying to decide, do I know these people and can I talk with them about it? Because they're going to end up sharing information about you. So it's fine to do that, but realize that it opens the door for them to engage in diligence that you're not going to be privy to.
Okay. If you had three things, advice that you would give to somebody, the three things to remember to do when you go into a negotiation, what would the top three things be?
So preparation, you know, it's the Girl Scout, Boy Scout rule. The better prepared you are, the more that you really understand either the other side, their company, their motivations, the motivations of the individuals at the table, right? Like if this person is gunning for a promotion because they get this deal done, you should know that and use that information to your own advantage. Then in addition, I would say giving people the benefit of the doubt in negotiations is an incredibly important thing. Oftentimes people get caught up in their sense of thinking their side is the only reasonable point of view, and not being able to put themselves in the other person's shoes and give the other side the benefit of the doubt that, you know, they're rational people just as much as you are, and they have real motivations for why they're asking for the things that they do, and that they see a logic to it. So a lot of the times, giving them the benefit of the doubt, starting from that, will allow you to ask questions to get at sometimes motivations that they may not even quite understand themselves yet, right? But it gives you an openness to ask questions, to probe, to seek to understand, and that in itself can provide you with valuable insight into your opposition and also help to pave the way to an agreement. Then the other thing I would say, if I had 3 top things, learn self-management skills. Negotiations can be extremely stressful situations. Thinking that there's a right or a wrong as opposed to whatever we're going to agree to, it's just going to raise your blood pressure. So try to develop tricks for yourself that are self-calming behaviors. There's one that I've learned to do that's very unobtrusive. One thing I learned was that when we're thinking about things that we're grateful for, our blood pressure, our heart rate, adrenaline in our system, all of those go down. So if I'm in a really tough negotiation, instead of boiling over, I start writing out lists of things I'm grateful for. And I can do that and, you know, be perfectly professional about, you know, look, I'm taking notes, and I am creating openness physiologically to the other side, and I'm also tapping into some of my higher mental processes, which all that adrenaline prohibits you from accessing.
Miriam, thank you so much. As always, you go beneath the surface and talk about things that are valuable to people. We've had, you can't see the comments, but there are several comments of people thanking us for the discussion, and especially you for your insights. Thank you for joining us. Next week we are going to have Brad Feld back to talk about getting acquired. So once again, thank you, and hopefully see you next week.
Thank you very much.